You're watching Let the Quran Speak. I'm Safiyyah, your host. Were women active in public life in early Islam? Often people think of women's participation as a modern invention or something invented. But that is not the case, according to this scholar, al-Halim Abu Shuqqah, who created a series called Women's Emancipation During the Prophet's Lifetime. And Dr. Shabir, we're looking at that now. In particular, we're looking at women's participation in public life, Dr. Shabir. And Abu Shuqqah provides many examples of women who were very active doing a number of things, which show that they weren't, confined or stuck to their house, but they were active in the wider society.
True. There are so many narratives, they're difficult to ignore. Abu Shuqqah has gathered from, the classical collections of Hadith, especially Bukhari and Muslim, narratives that show that the women were quite engaged in Muslim society. They participated in battle to a certain extent. They nursed the wounded. They worked, to provide for themselves and their families. They did things which would seem out of place in, a modern conception of what a pure Islamic society is supposed to be like, but it is there for the record.
So can you draw on those a little bit more, Dr. Shabir? You said women nursed the wounded. Are you referring to the story of Rufaidah?
Yes. Rufaidah is thought to be now the first nurse in the history of Islam.
Okay.
So when the early Muslims, just to give some background and context here, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born in Mecca, and he started to receive revelation. When he started his preaching, he was persecuted. His followers were persecuted. The Prophet, peace be upon him, migrated to Medina, where he was there for the last 10 years of his life. Now, during that time, the enemies from Mecca continued to attack the Muslims in large armies, one after another. The Muslims had to go out of the city limits to go and face this advancing army. And naturally, many of the Muslims were killed and wounded. So there were women who went out to support the Muslim soldiers. In those days, most likely men were the soldiers, and women performed some kind of auxiliary services, like providing water and nursing the wounded soldiers and bringing the wounded and dead back to the city, and so on. So the women did all of these, it's mentioned, to the extent that it is mentioned that Rufaidah, by name, as you rightly said, was the nurse who was taking care of them. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, had actually set up an area adjacent to the mosque, where the wounded will be brought. So this was, you can say, the first hospital, and Rufaidah was there treating them, and he wanted the patients to be brought there where it'll be close to him as well. But that meant that this nurse was operating in basically a very public type of facility. But more public than that was that they actually went out in the battle as well, and not as fighters, but as assistants. And they would carry water. And it is mentioned, like somebody said, that they saw Aisha, the mother of the believers, on that occasion, and her part of her shin was bare. The narrative does not go to show that there was anything indecent about this. They just seem to recognize that there's this different occasion. Like, this is not an occasion for admiring a woman's beauty. This is an occasion when you're in the midst of battle, and you can't live by all sorts of requirements. The requirements might be a little bit more lax. Now, of course, others will say, "Oh, but this was before the hijab requirement," and Abu Shuqqah wouldn't disagree with that, because according to Abu Shuqqah, the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, were required to be screened from men, and that, of course, happened a few years later than the narrative we're talking about here. But nonetheless, the way in which all of this unfolds shows there's a gradual evolution in the society where the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, eventually gets a restriction, but not other women. And what was reported about Aisha prior to what you call the hijab verse, which applied, according to Abu Shuqqah, to the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, but not to other women, it would mean that Aisha's situation that was described in this narrative was the situation of other women as well, and that would have continued. Okay, so
What about women working, Dr. Shabir? You just
Yeah.
mentioned that earlier.
Yeah,
I was
exactly.
curious about it.
I mean, yeah, women actually worked in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. There's a curious case of a woman who had actually been either divorced or widowed. My memory's a little bit shallow on that now, but after she wanted to go and pick her fruits
Okay.
so that she could sell, and some people objected because she was in what is classically called the waiting period after her separation from her husband, and the matter was brought to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and he said, "Yeah, go ahead and pick your fruits. So you might sell it, give some charity, and so on." And so he actually encouraged her to continue her work. So that shows that the question was not, can the woman work? The question was, can she work during the period of her waiting after the separation from her husband? And it wasn't even that whether she could work, is whether she could work like in public, because the perception was that the woman, after when she becomes a widow or a divorcee, she should remain free from all suspicion, so that in case she gets pregnant, one would not be puzzled as to who the father is. If she remains closely secluded, then the society would all be fine. Okay, we know the father is the last husband she had. So all of these restrictions were there. So the question was, can she go out to her orchard? And the answer from the Prophet, peace be upon him, was yes. So that means that the rest of it is all natural. A woman worked, whether she could have continued working at home. That would not have been an issue.
Dr. Shabir, as I'm hearing these stories and as I've read some of them in this series, I'm wondering why we don't know more of these stories today. Why does it come as a revelation when we're reading this book that, there's a story of Rufaidah or this woman in the orchard? Why aren't they more well known?
Yeah, because all of this, Safiyyah, has been reinterpreted in the light of a later developing piety. People over time, they develop certain rules for society. Scholars prescribe them in books, then people imbibe them. Sometimes it works the other way around as well, that people develop a certain pietistic sense. They want to be more, pious. Outside of Islam, people say more pious than the Pope or something like this, right? So in this case, people want to be more pious than the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and not deliberately so. They don't realize the direction in which they're going. So it's okay as an individual, you want to do something for yourself. You want to practice a higher level of piety. That's great, but you cannot impose it on society. But what happens is that when enough people take a certain thing to be the norm, the new norm of piety, then eventually this comes to be classified in the written manuals as well, because people see this as natural, and one who goes against this norm is obviously doing something indecent. They're pulling us back into the indecency. And then people forget the basis. So what Abu Shuqqah has done here is to bring us back to the basic of, the foundations of what we profess to follow. We profess to follow the Quran. We profess to follow the life example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So, okay, this is what it is. So how did you develop all of these norms and customs that prevent men and women from interacting with each other and so on? The Quran shows that men and women had a normal sort of interaction. Let me be more specific about that. In the Quran, it is mentioned that if a woman is widowed, she is to remain single for a period of time, 4 months and 10 days, and then, in that period of time, the Quran says, "La junaha alaykum fima aradtum bihi min khidbatin nisa'i aw aknantum fi anfusikum." There is no harm on you in what you vouchsafe to each other with regards to your intention to marry this widow, or even if you are giving a hint concerning it, because people would give hints rather than state something directly. Alim Allahu annakum satadhkurunahun. God knows that you are going to mention them. وَلَكِنْ لَا تُوَاعِدُوهُنَّ إِلَّا أَن تَقُولُوا قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا. But you are not to make a direct proposal to the women, although you might say something decent. You might say something decent. وَلَا تَعْزِمُوا عُقْدَةَ النِّكَاحِ حَتَّى يَبْلُغَ الْكِتَابُ أَجَلَهُ. But don't make like a firm marriage agreement until the woman has reached the end of this term that is prescribed. Okay. So the Muslim commentators have had to exercise their exegetical abilities now in thinking about what is meant by saying a decent word. So what would qualify as decent? Where do you cross the line? So they said that a man may say to a woman, lucky will be the man who has you for a wife. Or even, I find you attractive. Now, for this sort of conversation to be possible at all,
yes,
you must have a society in which men and women are interacting, they're seeing each other, and, an occasion might present itself for somebody to say this.
And this is a widow. This is not just an ordinary woman as well.
Exactly.
This is not a free woman, like a woman who's single, right? This is a woman who is obviously mourning the death of her husband.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And in that situation, for you to say this, it takes a certain degree of boldness and so on. All of this goes to show that men and women interacted more freely in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, than people want to admit. So what happens is that all of these narratives that Abu Shuqqah is bringing out from Bukhari and Muslim and from some other sources, but mainly from Bukhari and Muslim, they're there and they are known to the scholars. But what happens is that the scholars just pass over them. And they might be citing these narratives to make another point, but they're not homing in on this one issue. It's like the elephant in the room that nobody talks about. So Abu Shuqqah points out that Sharik was a woman who was very well known to be wealthy, and one got wealth in those days maybe through inheritance, but largely through trade and so on. In any case, her household was used she opened her home to visitors. So a lot of visitors came and went. Maybe people didn't have a place to stay. They came and stayed with Sharik at her place. For you to think that there's a woman who has a dwelling and people can go all and sundry, strangers, travelers, and so on, they can go end up at her place. This shows a sort of openness that got to be closed off later on. Now, of course, we respect moves towards decency, and we want to stay away from indecency. And we can say that many things in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, were done in a simple or primitive manner, and later on society became more and more refined. But every once in a while we have to reset our GPS. We have to ask ourselves, how did we get lost in the morass of all of these customs and developments? And we lost the essence of what was there at the beginning. And when Muslim societies find themselves so stifled by modern requirements and so on, and I say modern now, it's curious that I use that term, because people tend to think of something modern as being un-Islamic, and ancient as being more Islamic. But here we find that it's the later kind of stipulations that people invented and passed off as religious teachings that have come to really stifle Muslim communities, made it impossible for men and women to interact, for there to be developments in the workplace and in various fields of study and in human life.
Thank you for those insights, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiyyah and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.